Thank you very much, Marco. And it's a pleasure to be here speaking to you from our London studio today. So yes, you're right. We are now a practice of over 100 architects and designers. And as you say, we have our main studio here in Shoreditch in the central London. We have another studio in Bristol, and very shortly we're hoping to open a small studio in Madrid. So that's where we are today. But the journey began about 22, 23 years ago, still in Shoreditch. Three of us, young, 26, 27, had previously worked for some practices in London who are reasonably well known over here, Lifshitz Davidson being one of them, and Orms being another. Myself, Richard Buckley, and Fiammetta Gray set up the practice. Fiammetta is Italian, you'll all be pleased to hear, and had worked with Antonio Citerio in Milan for a few years. And then Richard and Fee married, and I was sort of, if you like, the third person in the relationship. So we set up the practice, and I think, like a lot of architectural practices, our work had begun with some fairly small projects of a residential nature. But it slowly grew over the years, and we've moved 2 or 3 times within Shoreditch. We came here originally because it was very cheap, and it was a part of London that was quite run down at the time. It was a very industrial part of London, although it's very close to the city of London. But over the last 20 years, that has sort of regenerated and refreshed itself as being a very important part of London now. So that's sort of quite quickly how the practice started and how we formed. The three of us had been friends at university, and that's how we kind of knew each other. And then we lost contact a bit, and then we came back together when we were working at LRMS, and decided that we would go and give it a go on our own. So that's sort of little brief history of how we started. And today, as I say, we work on a wide variety of projects, from a huge project in the centre of London at the moment, which is the Bishopsgate Goods Yard site, which is about 4.5 hectares of regeneration. Probably the last big scheme to be done in London. We're involved in that with other practices. That's just got planning permission a week ago. So that's at the big scale. But then on the smaller scale, we have projects right the way through the size and type of projects. And probably at the small end of things, we work on in the retail sector, and particularly for the Fred Perry brand, where they're global designers, and we're doing a number of their stores around the world. So from the big to the small, and pretty much everything in between. Yes. I think that we have we've never specialized. We have a series of studios within the bigger studio, but we don't those studios don't specialize in any particular brief or program. So we don't have retail and office and residential and schools. All the projects cross over the studios, and we've always encouraged that, because we think that if you're designing a residential building, then that can have an influence if you're designing a commercial building or a workplace. And so we like to cross filter our design ideas. So no one specializes is the first sort of starting point. And the second thing is that we always look at, we're very passionate about existing buildings, not only from obviously their historic nature in many cases, but also from a sustainability and a retrofit perspective. It makes no sense to knock buildings down just for the ego of the architect or for the ego of the client. If the host building has some real intrinsic style or has some joy to it, we can try and adapt that. And so, yes, you're right. We have done a lot of work in a lot of sectors around reuse of existing buildings. So it's interesting because it can apply to, we've just finished a gallery in South Kensington in the west of London, which is 5 grade 2 listed townhouses. They were originally townhouses, and there was a big yard at the back of them. And we've designed a new art gallery in the back of the building. So it's an entirely new building, but we've retained all of the character and the history of the townhouses, and those have become small galleries that then link to the bigger gallery behind. And I think that's a good example of how the history and the materiality and the sort of the knocks and the bangs of time over the old buildings has added to the experience of coming through those buildings to the new pristine gallery at the back. There is a real character, as you say, to that. The building has we say the building has good bones, and it over the years people have just put the wrong clothes on it. So you take all the clothes off and then you get back to the bones of the original building. Challenge now for all of us is to how do we put some of that character into our new buildings, because a lot of it is just the result of time. But we've done a lot of work trying to analyze how you get some of that character and robustness into new buildings. And so a lot of it is to do with volume in terms of height and space and light, but also using the structure of the building to express it. So leaving concrete floors, leaving concrete columns, making them slightly bigger than you'd need to, just so that there is some robustness and firmness to the new building. It's a very, very good question. And I don't think there's a simple answer to it, because every building, every site has a different answer to that question. But I think we're really passionate about sort of, rather than rebuilding, just preserving. So let's not restore, let's just preserve. So if a building we did a building in London a few years ago where the front half of the building was a beautiful building, but the back half of the building didn't really have any character, or had been didn't really work. So we demolished the back of the building and kept the front piece of the building. And the front piece of the building was a very ornate historic building, but there were arches that had been broken and had fallen down. And we didn't want to put those arches back. We were quite happy to leave the broken piece of fabric and then put the new building behind it. So it's about preserving rather than restoring. Well, it has been an extraordinary year, and I think our friends in Italy have suffered as much as anybody, and I think the honest truth is it's still very early days. We don't really know how this is going to affect or shift society. Some of the things that we've seen in terms of remote working, etc. I think I actually moved out of central London about 14 years ago and have a studio I'm lucky enough that I have in my garden to have a studio, and I work there for 2 days a week and work in London for 3 days a week. So that had been a process which had already begun, I think, and it's now been accelerated. But I have to say that in coming back, as we've slowly been doing here in the UK and particularly in London, there is a joy to be back with human contact, not just through work but through socializing. And I think we all, to a degree, the pandemic has allowed us to take a breath. But now I think we're sort of refreshed, and we all want to kind of get back into that reaction. Certainly in the creative dialogue within the studio, design reviews and sketching and working together is so much more enjoyable face to face than it is over Zoom. But then on the other hand, Zoom and these kind of conversations have been brilliant in terms of not necessarily having to jump on and off a plane every 5 minutes and run here and run there, and we can actually be quite efficient in terms of our workload. But I'm sure everyone will agree that you can't experience a city or a country or a town or a village without going there. And so I think we will return to a more transient world. I think the city is definitely not dead, despite what people say. I mean, even today I was in the west of London, and it's in South Kensington, and it was really busy. And then I go to the city of London, where it's more the office, the sort of financial centre, and that's very quiet. So even within the city of London, there are villages that are very busy, if you like, within them. So the key thing is, for me personally, I think the key thing is that people need to be able to live close to where they work. And for a long time, our major cities across the world have become unaffordable places to live. And I think if we can come back to living in our cities, then our cities will come back to life. I think what we're definitely seeing is a convergence of uses, and this has been a bit of a theme over the last few years, but is now really today as relevant as today. We're being asked to look at retail shopping centres and workplaces and hotels and residential, which are all coming together. Because our hotel clients are saying they want to get people to come and actively work in their hotels. They've lost the business travel, so they've realized people don't necessarily want to work at home all the time. So they're trying to get people to work in their hotels, and so the lobby spaces are becoming this sort of mixture of eating and meeting and working, etc. But at the same time, our workplace clients are asking us to make the workplaces more like hotels. So so we're getting this complete convergence of our lives within buildings to try and do everything. So we're definitely seeing that, definitely, yeah. And the other thing we've seen is that we've seen our workplace clients. We're very lucky to have been instructed to look at COVID planning for some of their tenants who haven't got that skill to do that, and we're working with those tenants to be able to replan their office space so that it is more COVID friendly. Now, and what that's going to do, I think, and I heard a great phrase the other day, which is we're going to move from being battery chickens to being free range. So we still are going to go to the work in the office, but maybe we're going to all have a bit more space, which will be quite nice. Yeah, that is changing a lot, actually. I mean, on a small level, it's changing in the workplace because people are wanting outside space on every floor of the office building. So the new buildings that we're currently designing have almost what we were doing in the domestic residential world. So the big sliding doors, the great Capoferri door that drops into the floor, the amazing moment when the facade disappears and you're outside. You were seeing that kind of beauty in residential design or in civic design, but now it's moving into office design, and people want to see that in their workplace. So on one level, there's the outside and the inside coming together on a floor by floor and a space by space basis. But then on the bigger scale, the reception areas of these of the workplace buildings, which for a while were quite grand. A lot of these big companies wanted to recreate the experience of Grand Central Station. They're huge spaces, but nothing happening in them. It was just you were just in awe as you walked in the door. You knew you were at somewhere important because you were just suddenly, you felt so tiny in this huge space. But now it's more about activity and what goes on in those spaces. And we started to see the coffee shops coming in, and we designed, but now it's moved to another level, and we're doing a couple of projects at the moment, one of which is called Technique, and it's in Clerkenwell in London. And there we are creating a space on the ground floor of the building. It's a workplace, it's an office building, but the entire ground floor is an art gallery. And you wouldn't know, a visitor to the building would not know whether it was a workplace, a gallery, a shop. You walk in, and then you will find the place to go and where to have a look. I mean, we enjoyed going and seeing the Prada building in Milan, and the gallery space there. A few years ago, we went and had a look about Foundation Prada. And amazing. That's another good example. Is it an office? Is it a headquarters? Is it a gallery? Is it a public space? And so this is now coming into our designs for office buildings. And we have another scheme in Cambridge, so outside of London, where we have two office buildings. We have a big brother and a little brother, and between the two buildings is a market space, and it's going to be a food market. But that is where you enter the building and go to one office building or the other office building. But you're entering through an animated, exciting, vibrant space, not a kind of clinical, huge, grand office reception. So definitely there's a change in that direction. Technology is really important, because I think, we saw many years ago the technology in window design that enabled us to have to go to an airport and to look directly out onto the tarmac, and we couldn't do that previously because of noise and fire and all of the concerns about the air side and the land side. So if you like, at the Formula One scale, technology came in and allowed airports to do that. But that is now filtered down, and what that's now allowing us to do is have much greater expanses of daylight into our smaller buildings and into our cities and into our streets. But the technology is controlling both the environment that is entering the building, but also ensuring that the environment that the building has created is not dominating the street. So the technology has become very important in that regard. And I think that it may differ in other cities around the world, but in London we have a number of the sort of great estates that owned parts of London, the Grosvenor estate being a good example. And what those estates are able to do is they're able to take a bigger view than one particular site. So the new buildings, the buildings are nice, but it's not about the buildings, it's about the spaces that you create between the buildings. They're also able to work with the types of tenants and occupiers that are going to go into those spaces. And so we're seeing smaller companies, more independent companies, more makers and creators coming into those spaces, and therefore making them a really interesting experience to go there. We've seen and that's a reaction to the blanket approach of our high streets that we've all seen over the last 20 or 30 years. You arrived in one city, it was pretty much the same as everywhere else. It had the same retail shops all the way down. So in a way, online retailing hopefully has killed a lot of that, and that's a very sad state of affairs in terms of the amount of job losses that has caused. But I would hope that those job losses will be refound in the new technologies and the new ways of working. But a positive, I think, to come out of that is that it's making those cities and those towns a more unique experience to them. And so it makes you want to go to these different places. It's not just one big homogenous thing. Yeah, so we have tried, and I'm trying really hard because not just Capoferri, but the whole the Italian, particularly the Italian workmanship and skill and attention to detail. But what makes it so fantastic is the attention to detail, but the understanding of design and detail coming together. And we've worked with a number of Italian firms that provide that, and Capoferri, we're desperate to do the same, and they've worked for some of our other clients, and we've introduced them to some of our other clients. Of course, that skill of design and detail does not come cheap. Okay, so we for the right project, we will definitely work with them. But I had a great experience going both to date with the guys at Capoferri, and also going to their two factories. Amazing, a wonderful part of the world to go anyway. But these are guys and ladies who are just passionate about what they do, and they create some fantastic product as part of that. And as an architect, whether it's the windows or the brickwork or the joinery or the electrics, you want those craft people to add to your design. I'm not an expert in windows, so I want to work with someone who's an expert in windows and brings a bit more to the design than I ever thought was possible to bring. And that's when it works really, really well. Capoferri, they're the best at doing that, for sure. We're finishing a project shortly in Milan, which is a workplace project which has achieved great value for our clients over there, working with the local developers. So we're finishing that. We have two projects in Madrid, which again similarly finishing quite soon. And as I mentioned, we have a number of other projects happening. One about to start in Rome, and wider field. We have projects in Belgium and in Moscow. In fact, I mean, we are passionate. We're passionate about Europe and the way that we work together. And we've seen a real growth despite all the talk of Brexit. We as a studio have seen a lot of growth in taking our approach into Europe and working with clients over there. So much so that we are, we're actually seeing about creating a BGY Europe brand, because as I say, we're working in these other areas, and we've really enjoyed working over there. I think the London market is very driven by the financial results of the project, and that's not to say that other projects in Europe don't have those requirements. They do have those requirements, but they deal with them in a more subtle way, I think, and allow. I think the interesting thing with Europe is that it understands value as much as it understands cost, and the UK spends a lot of time looking at the cost and not much time looking at the value.